Gracias for pressing play y welcome to Smart Chickens, a working together smarter where diversity meets innovation and growth podcast. In today's episode, we have a very special guest, Karishma Veljee. She's the co-founder and president of DigitalHire, a digital interview platform that helps employers get to know their candidates and make better hiring decisions, all while getting time back in their day to focus on growing their business. She shared with me her origin story from growing up in Pakistan and learning the life of a successful entrepreneur, her father, to studying college abroad here in the US at Clark University and majoring with a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics and Political Science. Her journey during and post-college in the sales trenches led her to an entrepreneurship journey, founding a successful recruiting firm that provided her and her co-founders with an idea for her second venture, a SaaS video interviewing platform, DigitalHire. We discussed the changing hiring landscape with millennials and Gen Z professionals being the new workforce demographics and how personal branding and showcasing soft skills is becoming more important for candidates looking to differentiate themselves to potential hiring managers and employers. Alternatively, employers who are looking to become an employer of choice in their industry also have to humanize their brand and find new ways to connect with potential hires and showcase their unique corporate culture in a very competitive recruitment atmosphere. DigitalHire is on a fast-paced track for growth, working across diverse industries, helping HR and talent management professionals to connect better with top talent candidates by leveraging their video interviewing platform to gain back 40% time back in their day and focus their efforts on growing their business. She also gives us some of her book recommendations to help those that want to get 1% better, and she shares the advice she would give a younger Karishma if she could go back to the future. As always, this podcast is brought to you by our good friends at digitechie.com, a conversational marketing demand gen and six-figure sales pipeline revenue accelerator consultancy, and gypsyforever.com, uniquely handmade wellness products that help you connect your mind, body, and soul to achieve a better balanced you. So, vamos, let's dive into the show. And without further ado, here's Karishma Veljee. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Smart Chickens podcast. It's a diversity meets and drives innovation and growth podcast. So we like to feature founders and guests that have a diverse background. And so I want you to kind of, delve into a bit of your origin story, because I know we had another call where we talked a little bit about that. But on this call, I want you to kind of take us a little bit to your background story.
For sure. And, I'm honestly so excited to chat about this because I know we conversed about this earlier, but I so agree that, your origin really does matter, and especially in the decisions that you make in your life and in your career and so on and so forth. So for me, I'm from Pakistan. That's where I was born and raised. And I come from a family of business owners. So my dad started his business when he was really young. He started from absolutely nothing and was able to build this beautiful life for us. And just growing up in that environment and seeing him work so hard all his life was, so empowering and just really such a good lesson for me to learn and really get the strength that it takes to push through in business and in life in general from that. So I was actually fortunate enough that my parents could afford to send me to college abroad. So from Pakistan, after I graduated from high school, I moved over to the US and I went to Clark University for my undergrad. And honestly, just like every other person, I studied something that has nothing to do with the industry that I'm in right now. But I studied economics and I studied political science and absolutely loved it. And when I graduated, I sort of moved, to the hub of both those industries, which is Washington, D.C. And, as I was looking for jobs and connecting with and networking with people from that industry, and I was going to, different interviews, I sort of quickly realized that I didn't see myself, thrive in that bureaucratic sort of environment. Personally, I thrive in environments where I can develop people or, steer the wheel and make decisions and strategize. So I kind of pivoted a little bit, actually quite a lot. And I started my first job, which was in sales. Now, at the time, a lot of people who were close to me didn't really understand why I was doing that. But I really started from the bottom of the totem pole. I did door-to-door sales. I did business-to-business sales for a couple of telecom companies. And again, I used to get questioned a lot about why I was working weekends. I was working long hours. I was working straight commission. But, you know, if I look back at it, a lot of the progression I've had in my career, or even the path that I've taken since, I credit a lot of that to what I learned in sales. You know, so I was there for about 3 years and I built up my value enough and I got promoted a bunch of times. And I was about ready to start my own sales company there. And
Mhm.
again, at that time, I had to make a very difficult decision to pivot again and leave my career over there and move back home to my country, which is Pakistan. Now, again, a lot of people didn't really understand my decisions, and I really didn't come back with any plan either, you know.
Mhm.
For someone who likes to be in control of her life, that was quite a big change for me as well. But really, in hindsight, when the chips had fallen, when my back was completely against the wall, that's really where I feel my entrepreneurial journey started. So I started my first company in 2018, which was a high volume recruiting agency. So we were able to build a pretty, you know, big team fairly quickly, and we worked with over 25 different sales offices based in the US. And we hired for their sales, direct sales, and retail sales positions. And then
Was
shortly
this
after,
Carvel Consulting?
exactly, Carpel
Okay.
Consulting. And, you know, shortly after that, you know, started Digital Hire, co-founded Digital Hire with two of my colleagues from DC and my very dear friends, Mark Hodge and Amanda Tram. And, you know, I'm just grateful for the path I've taken in life, and I'm very excited to grow and scale the business.
Yeah, it sounds interesting that you definitely took like a
Mhm.
economics and political science in sort of the heart of probably political, which is DC, and your
Exactly.
path. I'm presuming, you tell me, was it sort of at one point an aspiration to get and work in DC as in a consulate, let's say, or in
Mhm.
were you looking to were some of your ambitions before you took a different path, a very different path for sure.
Mhm.
What was it that kind of led you to get that or think about that degree and maybe have a future in politics
For sure. So, you
or
know,
public service?
yeah, so within political science, I concentrated on international relations. And
Mhm.
honestly, till this day, I love reading about it. You know, I'm very, very interested in it. But what really changed was one summer I came back home and I interned with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Okay.
And great people, you know, great environment. I learned so much. But I needed a signature for my boss's boss's boss to get two books out of the archives. You know what I mean? So I didn't really see myself
Oh,
in
are you
that
talking about bureaucracy and the levels of command and the slowness as at which the public sector operates versus the private sector, right? Or at least
exactly.
what you knew of the public sector at that point.
Exactly. From my experiences, you know, obviously, I still love, you know, those subject matters, but I just had a different vision for my life. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the environment that I grew up in, you know,
Mhm.
so on and so forth.
So
My dad is, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of that, because now that I know also that your entrepreneurship comes from your father and you know your upbringing, you know
Mhm.
how did that impact you? In other words, did you work with him or did you see how he grew a business from zero to nothing, from nothing to something, hiring people, taking the risks? As you know, entrepreneurs we take an enormous risk, but then the high risk high reward is sort of the mentality we have, right? How did that, if you can unpack that a little bit for our listeners who are thinking, and they might be in that same situation, right? So they've gotten their degree, they think they're in a path that's sort of linear because of that
Yeah.
degree and what that degree typically has you go through into a career path. But then you've got that influence of entrepreneurship from your father and your upbringing. Dive into that
Yeah.
a little bit. I'm just curious, like how did that happen?
For sure. So for me, honestly, I till this day, my dad is the hardest working person I know. You know, and really, if I think back on it, giving the life that he didn't have to his children, and you might understand this culturally, right? Giving the life and education that he didn't have in his life to his children was such a driving force for him. I remember just one story that is just so formative in, you know, my upbringing and just, you know, the path and the decisions I've made. When I was about 12 years old, my dad had a very serious heart attack. And obviously, it was a very scary time for the family. And I very clearly remember going into his hospital room right before they took him in for surgery to put stents in his heart. And, he told me to stop crying because he's not going to go yet because he still had to educate his children.
Mhm.
So at the
Yeah.
time, my older brother and I were both pretty young and still had to fulfill his dream of going to college, getting a good education. So I feel like for me personally, just growing up in that environment has a lot to do with what I do today.
Mm.
Even right now at over 60, he's still the hardest working person, and I feel like I get a lot of my work ethic from him as well. And I just hope to be, as business savvy and like charismatic as he is one day. So I really do feel that, growing up within a business environment, I didn't necessarily work with him directly, to answer your question, but obviously, the decision making at the dinner table, what is, obviously a lot of the business is impacted over the years by a lot of things like COVID-19 just recently. So, just a lot of that is what I want to be doing in my life and my career is like, driving revenue, growing businesses, give opportunity to people, things like that. So I think that's really where my passion for it comes from.
Interesting. And yeah, definitely we all we all get influenced early on in our lives and in our career paths because of the people that are around us, whether they're a mentor or they're, like the in your case, your father, like, or a father figure. So that's interesting. So now that you kind of mentioned the word C19, right? The
Yeah.
pink elephant in the room that we've all had to deal with, the cards that we've all dealt with, that were dealt with in 2020. Your journey got you into this company, DigitalHire, which I'll let you describe what it is. And I think it's sort of opportune because one, you're telling us your origin story. So, this year has been amid this pandemic has also been a year of, I think, at least here in the U.S. and maybe globally, but definitely in the U.S. of a bit of a social awakening of
Yeah.
not only Black Lives Matter but people of color, founders of color, women founders, really do matter, and not just the sense of let's check the box that we do have a woman of color that's a founder or a woman as a founder, but truly just the way that the global economy and here in the US, the diversity has changed so much over the last 20, 30 years for sure. I'm 45 on the fourth floor. I'm first generation graduate, first generation American. My parents came from overseas to this country, just like your parents, to try to give you a better, I mean, your parents didn't leave, but they gave you and your brother a better opportunity at life through
Yeah.
education. Same thing with my folks when we came over here from Ecuador in the 80s. So I can relate to that for sure.
Absolutely.
But now, amid what has happened this year with C19, plus just the convergence of, it's maybe the best time and worst time, some could argue, to open a business, to innovate, right? Because it's never been easier, quote unquote, in history to be able to leverage technology, find a niche, and then launch and go to market, right? The barriers have gone down significantly. Perhaps maybe not the capital as a barrier. That's always a barrier, regardless of the time that you're in, I guess. It's always a challenge. And there definitely is room for improvement there for VC monies for founders of color and women, for sure. The data tells us that. But in general, talk us through a little bit of how you came about to get the birth of, just this year of DigitalHire.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I'll tell you a little bit about what DigitalHire is and what it does. And it's exactly what you mentioned, right? Our company started in the middle of the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we only had 3 clients and we had just entered our beta phase. So we were really, we launched literally right at the beginning of the pandemic. So essentially, DigitalHire is a company that really was created to solve a lot of problems that business owners all over the world face. So in the sales industry that we were in, or really any high volume recruiting industry, there's such a constant need of finding great people to grow your business. So what that means is you're constantly spending time on recruiting and especially conducting interviews. And as you can imagine, as your business grows and expands into different locations, it becomes harder and harder to give time to that aspect, right? Especially as a business owner, you wear so many different hats that, hiring is obviously one of the biggest responsibilities, but you want majority of your day to be spent on things that are going to drive your revenue and, focus on clients and customers. And we were certainly in that situation too, because sales recruiting really is the lifeline of the sales industry, right? And we were finding ourselves doing interviews anywhere between 4 to 6 hours every single day. So we knew there had to be a better way to go about that. So we wanted to give employers a platform where they can do hundreds of interviews every single day in an on-demand fashion. And really what it is a video-based platform, which is so important in the times that we're in right now, because personal branding is so important, right?
Sure.
Employer branding is so important. So we'll unpack that a little bit, but essentially we started off in 2019 and spent, a couple months into development. And right when we launched our beta phase, COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. So we really met as a team and figured out what our challenges were going to be, and as well as what the opportunities were going to be, right? Because we had created this platform to solve the problem of, having less time spent on recruiting, or really giving ease of access to do more interviews. But we never accounted for a reality that that would be the only option, right? Yeah. So with social distancing and everything going virtual, we saw a huge opportunity there. But we also wanted to stay true to who we were as founders, and what really we were trying to do is really make the job market better. So we met as a team and we decided to give our product absolutely free to any small or medium-sized company that was hit by COVID and impacted by it. So literally overnight, in the span of a week and a half, we went from 3 clients all the way to 53. So obviously, as a business owner,
it's a nice problem to have.
It is a nice problem to have. And, we've been fortunate that our, customers love our product and our service. And, we've retained most of them now that, we've moved into the different phase. But, obviously, I think it's been a great lesson, because, you want to stay focused as a company, especially as a startup, but you want to be ready to pivot. And I feel like that's exactly what we did and had to do at the time.
That's an interesting word you just used about pivot, because a lot of the guests that I've had have all discussed sort of the macro and micro pivots that they've had to do, right? So you can imagine, and I don't know if these are any of the verticals that you guys cater to, but a call center that was taking reservations for the Marriotts of the world, right? They had to pivot for sure with COVID-19. They had to do both a macro pivot at the industry level, which is, the bookings for hotels went down significantly, both here in the U.S. and abroad. But now their call volume might have increased because of people trying to figure out what are they doing with, basically if they already had booked or pre-booked for conferences, block meetings, whatever, and all of a sudden you now have to do that, but not in a call center, but through a different type of virtual way of doing this, right? So, and as you know, in call centers and any high sales volume kind of roles or industries, there's also, unfortunately, it could be a significant churn. So you're constantly getting people in and out, right? And I just saw a study somewhere about that on average, I don't know if this is true for the call centers or that segment of the business, Karishma, but that it's like anywhere between $4,000 to $5,000 is what, a typical organization is gonna invest in onboarding a new salesperson, and it could even be more depending on the the company. Right. So I would presume that talent management, hiring managers, CFOs, they want to make sure that even if that if they're in a fortunate position where they actually are growing, they're thriving amid these conditions with C-19, that they're hiring the right person, right, so that they can persist and not have churn, and then have to come back to the process of hiring. Talk to us a little bit about that. What have you seen? What are you listening to as a soundboard through your platform and the folks you work with?
Absolutely. So it's interesting that you brought it up, because for me personally and us as founders, the biggest gap that we wanted to bridge was really between employers and job seekers understanding each other. The biggest problem that I see my clients especially making is that they tend to spend a lot of their time with the wrong candidates, right? So either candidates that are underqualified or overqualified. Now, obviously, as a business, it's not very smart to spend your time that way. But more importantly, it doesn't leave your candidates with a good experience either, right? So I personally feel very strongly about addressing those changes. I spoke about personal branding a little bit earlier, right? So we wanted to give a platform where it's easy to understand each other because, especially through my experience with the recruiting agency, I've come to realize that recruiting as an industry is a very keyword driven space, right? Millions of resumes get overlooked every single day because recruiters look for specific keywords and specific job titles in search of that perfect, talent.
Right.
Now, even if your resume does make it past the initial screening, which is automated, it only gets
It's all software driven now, right? Algorithms that are checking out keywords to match with the sort of intent, almost like intent data through keywords on that job description to the candidate's resume. So talk us through that, because now you're going to get into, I'm sure, what differentiates a little bit of the personal branding, right?
Exactly. So because it's so keyword driven, right? How are you supposed to find the perfect talent that would have, thrived in the position that you have open? Especially, like I said, if your resume does make it through the automated screening, it only gets a very limited amount of time. Usually only a couple seconds with the hiring manager. So we really found a way that would let the candidates tell their own stories better than their resume can, right? Because a resume is a piece of paper, and how are you really supposed to tell if a candidate's going to be a good fit? Now, I'm sure you've seen and heard that a lot of big companies don't require college degrees anymore, right? Why is that? Because your educational background doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be a good organizational fit or that you're really
Right.
going to thrive, So there's such a twist in the job market and the way we, hire talent these days, because we're really looking for soft skills more than anything, right? Especially in my company, I always root for the underdog, right? Because I was one. So really what I look for is, people that come to work with a great attitude, people who are down to learn and work hard to get better. But how are you really supposed to tell that by reading a piece of paper?
Yeah,
So what
I
the
agree.
platform does is, it gives the candidates the opportunity to make videos as their answers to the questions, and they're really able to show their personality. And it kind of works both ways, right? Because we know that employer branding is so important in the job market right now. That you as a company don't pick the talent anymore; the talent picks you. So it's extremely candidate driven.
I love
And
that. Can you say that again? Because I think that's one of the value drops from this podcast. Say
for
that again
sure,
slowly.
for sure. So as a company, because the job market is so candidate driven right now, you don't pick the talent anymore. The talent picks you. So it's extremely important to brand yourself as an employer and show your company culture. But how are you going to do that? Is your job description, and your job positions that you put out on LinkedIn and different, job boards, is that really going to do you justice? So imagine, if you were looking for a job, how much more personalized your choices would be if you could watch a video of a CEO or a VP of a department, in a video, break down exactly what they were looking for in a position, but more importantly, what values their company stood for and what goals they had, moving forward. And same goes for candidates, right? They have the ability to make videos and really show their personality. One thing that is very interesting, especially right before COVID happened, we know that 70% of the candidates in the job market were passive candidates. What that means is they already had a job, but they still kept their LinkedIn profiles updated. They still,
Right.
posted their resumes on different job boards, just in case, a better
Right.
opportunity came around. Now, of course, this has, of course, changed because of, COVID layoffs and all. But I think more than that, it's a generational thing, because
Absolutely.
if you think about it, right? Who are the people that are entering the workforce right now? It's
Right.
the end of the very tail end of the millennials, or
Right.
it's the Gen Zs,
Right.
right? And what
Absolutely.
we know about them is that they prioritize things differently. I was reading this study by Robert Half that a third of the Gen Z population would happily take a 10 to 20% pay cut in order to go work for a company whose values aligned more with theirs, right?
Oh,
So,
I love that sentiment, and you bringing up that stat, and I'll tell you why. So earlier on today, I had the luck and privilege to be with George Washington University Milken Health Administration Institute
amazing.
students and their deans talking about this very same thing, which is how to get into residency programs, internships, and their career paths. Resume writing is still a skill needed, especially when you don't have too much of a, let's say, career, you don't have really much of a career to write about. So you're trying to get the foot in the door. But we talked about this. We talked about value congruence because these are young millennials or tail end of millennials, young, Gen Zs that are graduating. And to your point, their motives for getting into a career path is no longer just about the salary. It could be about, and very much so, about the culture fit, about the values that company has, whether it's like more Google-esque or it's, pro environment or some other things that are a little bit less, cut and dry, that brands and companies are learning to, and have been for some time now, but are learning now to embrace more because, to your point, the workforce has changed in that is also a priority for their decision making, whether they want to come work for you or your competitor. So I love that you're saying that because that falls right into what I heard from them. And these were, young professionals at George Washington University. Soon to be young professionals from George Washington University in the healthcare industry. And a lot of what their questions were a little bit about that. So not just the mechanics of, how am I going to get hired from just my writing resume skills, but I could see how video, which, as you know, digital natives is basically synonymous with Gen Z and probably with millennials as well, right? They want to be able to express themselves via video about who they are holistically, not just how they might fit, that job description. So this is great. What other insights have you seen with now you guys have, gone from, like you said, 6 clients to 51. So that's like, what is that? Like almost 7x more, 8x, Yeah. What other trends are you seeing? And not trends for the sake of it, just trends. But, the reality, I think, to your point, is that we are working with a different generation of workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a new reality with work remote, distributed work, and what that means into the whole process of, of talent management and recruiting and hiring. What are you seeing both from the, the potential candidates and also from like hiring managers from companies you guys work with that are other kind of underlying factors on why it's so important to have a digital platform to connect the two?
Absolutely. I thought I knew recruiting, and just, in the last couple of months, just looking at the data, the pure data has taught me so much, right? From the candidate end, just like what we were just talking about, the people that we're seeing come through, especially right now, we're, following the niche that we've been in, which is really sales, and, a high volume recruiting for sales. So within this industry, a lot of the candidates that we see come through are, either later millennials or Gen Zs. And obviously what we know about them is that they're digital natives, like you said. They're the generation that didn't know a life, before the internet. And we also know that they, really care about making a positive impact. So just from that experience, I feel like it's, there's a ton of researchers out there that show that a lot of this generation really considers technology to be a huge factor also in deciding what company they're going to work for. I was actually just talking on LinkedIn about this today, but there's horrible stats about how, there's such a big gap in the way we communicate to candidates and how much more they want from us. So we're seeing, over 60% of candidates who are demanding that they are responded to over time, in a very timely manner. Now, again, this may have changed, right because of COVID, but right before that, we know that top talent was off of the job market within the first 10 days. And especially if 70% of the candidates are looking for jobs passively, That means, the candidate that you're talking to is probably going to get called by another recruiter just within the same day. So how are you really differentiating yourself? There's a ton of research out there as well about how video job posts are already a thing that is helping companies, brand themselves. So really, Digital Hire has allowed our customers to, meet in the middle on that platform where candidates can understand the employers and employers can really get to know the candidates, especially the people we're seeing come through, not only for these positions, but in the workforce in general right now. They're so creative, right? This is the Snapchat, this is the TikTok generation that loves to express themselves.
Yes.
And they're great at social media. You know what I mean? They love to express themselves. So are we really going to find out who they are just by reading a cover letter or a resume about them? The other thing that we know is that with everything virtual right now, working from home, people have different schedules. And especially if you are recruiting a candidate who already works at a company, it oftentimes becomes hard to schedule them in for an interview. So the data that we have so far is showing us that a lot of our interviews are getting taken at 10 p.m. or, on Saturday at 11 a.m. So obviously, having that flexibility to give your candidates that we understand that, there's a lot going on, and we've invested in a platform that lets you do your interview whenever it's most convenient for you. So those are, sort of the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one thing that it comes to mind, because I've hired both Z's and millennials myself too, and everything you've said is very true about their sort of mindset or thinking about entering into an agreement, if you will, to work for someone, right? Is that they do want to be valued for their whole package. What they value has to be important or aligned to what they see in the values of the company they're working for. But what I'm also thinking right now is if I put myself in the shoes of, let's say, someone who's in their 40s, maybe 50s, who is part of the hiring manager decision, right? They've got a lot going on right now. They've had to maybe make their whole team remote. They've had to now work with their partners in HR and talent management to, strategically hire maybe some, not only maybe entry level sales folks, SDRs, BDRs, but maybe they want to get another kind of director level to come in and help with their hiring. What have you noticed? Because, when I think of like, a middle manager or a senior manager that has been used to and accustomed to pre-C19 to do there's the phone screening. Well, okay. So there's the interviews get done through the system, right? The interview process system that will find who. Then you got your talent management or recruiters out doing the first round screening. Then you've got the phone call, right, with a hiring manager. And then maybe it's the third round, which is the hiring manager, the decision maker, plus maybe, two people from another division or someone else that person is either going to report to or we're going to be part of the team that they're trying to get from feedback. So almost like a committee interview, right? A committee-based interview. Have you seen or noticed that with platforms like this, it's opening the doors for also those decision makers and the folks that might have been in the 40s, 50s that were accustomed to this pre-C19 kind of world where you can have this and also have face-to-face people coming into the office? How have they accepted the change management? I guess that's the best way to put it, right? Because for them and their peers that might have been in talent management, now they've got to accept this as the new normal, but also all the technologies that might come with it. And every time you introduce a new technology, there's always sometimes a bit of a push against it because it's, it causes a bit of friction between departments or resources or now, onboarding and training, all that. What can you kind of unwrap or dive into a little bit around that?
Absolutely. So it's interesting you said that because, I've been on both ends of the recruiting funnel, right? I've been the interviewer and the hiring manager, but I've also been the recruiter calling candidates, right? And with or without COVID-19, there's always been such a gap within that decision-making process, right? Which is why it tends to take a lot longer for us to get back to candidates. And regardless of technology or not, right? If you think about your business and how you're going to scale and grow, it really comes down to you finding the best people for it, right? You can have all the vision and the goals in the world, but if you don't have the right team to make them happen, your business really isn't going to go that far, right? Excuse me. So I would say that how I have seen, people come and meet in the middle is just, giving them a collaborative platform. Essentially, the goal is to find the best of the best candidates. And if you're a recruiter just calling candidates that, come through your funnel, you're not going to go very far every single day. So
Mhm.
so essentially, what DigitalHire does is lets you bring in more candidates into your recruiting funnel. Why? Because you don't have to personally do the phone interview, 100 times a day. You just need to send your interview link to 100 candidates a day, right? So you're really getting more candidates into your funnel, which is going to give you better choices, right? And then it really comes down to spending your time with the best candidates from there.
So, no, that
So
makes sense. That makes total sense. And people are looking for things that are scalable, repeatable, and leveraging technology more than ever because of just where workforce kind of is heading and has been maybe for the last few years. To your point, so that makes total sense. Now, getting a little bit back to you, you gave us a bit of your origin story. You're right now in Pakistan, correct?
yep.
Okay, so that's a good amount of time hour difference. It's
Oh yes, it is.
evening.
It is 12:35 a.m. right now.
Okay, so it's about to. So I appreciate it again because I know that there's quite a bit of a time difference. But thinking about it from a global perspective, right? So obviously, I'm here in the U.S. We see the numbers. We know that many people got furloughed. We also saw that there was an acceleration in certain industries, healthcare, for example. Obviously, an acceleration. The companies and services around healthcare, so telehealth, took a nice spike up. They were already on a trajectory, but many say, that COVID-19, C-19 has become an accelerator of sorts for obviously certain industries. And by virtue of that, those that were better equipped or are better equipped to flexibly pivot and do those micro and macro pivots are going to fare better than others, right?
Sure.
What are you seeing on the global side of things, right? I'm curious. You're in Pakistan. We've got a whole day, like almost like a half a day you're ahead of us. So what have you experienced there in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's interesting because this is probably for the first time in all of our lifetimes that we're seeing such a global, experience together. The situation is the same all over the world. Obviously, the numbers are different. We're fortunate here because we were recognized, I think, by the World Health Organization as being one of the countries that have dealt the best with, COVID numbers.
That's great.
So, but at the end of the day, your business and people are going to be the same all over, and there's going to be hardships and challenges all over. But I mean, from my experience, we're pretty much doing the same thing as probably any other business in the world. We're still working from home. Me personally, I'm constantly in a state of jet lag, but I do work on the Eastern time zone. So, my interaction is still with a lot of the, American companies and clients and things like that. But on our end, I think it really comes down to making the best of what you have and really preparing yourself for what's about to come.
Right. That's interesting that you mentioned that. We're in a global workforce, so you can get talent. And I would say that more than ever, companies are more than ever open to work remote from home. Twitter's obviously famous, for saying everyone work from home, as he tweeted it, maybe 3, 4, no more, like 7 months ago, almost, right? Like
Right.
almost like the month into the global
First one.
pandemic. So I think distributed workforce and remote workforces are going to become more the norm than they ever were because of this, right? So I agree that that everyone's sort of living their own version of it, but we're sort of in this global pandemic together. So part of what I like to learn and explore about my guest, Karishma, is sort of what their lifelong learning kind of appetite. So if you could jump back into DeLorean, and one of my favorite movies was the franchise of Back to the Future with Marty and with the Doc. So if you were to jump and go back through the time continuum and speak to you're already young enough as it is, and I'm presuming, a millennials as a founder, but what kind of either advice or pivot would you make knowing what you know now?
That's very interesting. Honestly, I if I
Or
think about
nothing, you don't have to do any changes.
no, 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 absolutely not. Obviously, there's so much that I could have done better, but I think I not necessarily a younger self, but if I think back to just a couple years ago,
Hmm.
there's one story that really resonates with me the most, and it was something that I heard from my sales manager in DC when I was going door to door in like 4 feet of snow. So at the time, when he told us this anecdote about the acre of diamonds, I just thought that, oh my gosh, this is just to get me motivated enough to go close some deals. But now that I look back at it, it's such a, again, one of those formative stories for me personally that I resonate with so much. So I don't know if you've heard this anecdote before, but it's basically a story about an African farmer that he owned a huge piece of land, and he heard a lot about other farmers who were selling their properties and moving around and traveling the continent and making a lot of money, by discovering diamond mines. So he ends up selling his property in pursuit of traveling to go find these diamonds. And he wanders for years and years and doesn't really end up with anything and ends up taking his own life. Now, it turns out that a couple years later, the person who had bought his land ends up finding an entire acre of diamonds underneath his own that very land. So I feel like that for me is now looking back at the important, pivot that I made by leaving my career in the US and moving back. It makes me realize that, my acre of diamonds has been underneath my own feet this entire time. So I am somebody who really thinks that, internalizes that self responsibility. And, it is, so I would definitely tell myself that, even though you don't have a plan, it is possible to make the most of the opportunities you're given. And it's, all about working on yourself so that you can see opportunities where other people don't. So,
Wow. Well, I love that anecdote and that story, and it makes sense. Sometimes your gold mine or your diamond mine, like you say, it might be right under your nose or your feet. So for
exactly.
you, it meant going back to your native homeland of Pakistan, but making a global impact for the better for the workforce industry and recruiting industry at large. So that's awesome. Now, I always believe that lifelong learners and that leaders are readers.
Yep.
So if we could dive into some either, book recommendations that you would advise to someone you're bringing into your company, and or just in general, someone who's out there listening and wants to kind of get 1% better and
Yeah.
via a book, whether it's through their Kindle, Amazon, Audible, or just literally old fashioned, like what I have in the back here.
Yeah. Me
What
too.
would you recommend? And I see you have some as well. What are some
Yeah.
that you recommend?
Honestly, there's so many. How many do you want?
No, just your top one, two, three, at the most. Yeah,
Awesome.
because
So
I agree. There's so many to reference, right?
for sure. So there is actually one book that I recommend to everybody. I've bought multiple copies for my team, for my friends. And that book is called Maximum Achievement by Brian Tracy.
Okay.
And the reason I like that book so much is because, it's no fluff, it's no BS. He calls it as it is. He talks without giving too much away. He talks a lot about, there's certain realities in life that us as adults need to, really understand in order to become high performing individuals. So the first one he talks about is very simple, but he says that life is hard. It is what it is. So no matter how hard you think your life is, there's somebody out there fighting a more difficult battle. And then the reason I resonate with it so much is because he says anything that you are or you ever will be is entirely up to you, and you can really learn anything to become anything. And the reason why I resonate so much to that is because, I don't think I'm the most talented person. I don't think I'm the smartest chicken. But what I do know is that I'm a very hard worker, so that gives me confidence that if I'm bad at something, I know I can bet on myself and work really hard to become great at it. So, just having that self-confidence and again, internalizing that self-responsibility. The other one I would say is Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins.
Mhm.
And the reason I like it so much is not because of any motivational or inspirational reasons, but personally, I'm very fascinated by the human mind and particularly our subconscious mind and how that works. So he talks a lot about, us as humans, we get so moved by other people's words, right? If it's a political leader, a historic figure, or even our parents and teachers, we take their word for, to our heart and really get moved by it. But he talks about how the words we speak to ourselves are, just as important, if not even more. And he really breaks down the science of it as well, which is neuro-linguistic programming. So again, a very, very good book if you're, obviously interested in learning more about the human mind. And then the one last one I guess I would talk about is something that I recently finished, which is a little bit more specific to the tech industry.
Okay.
And that one is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. So, as you know, Peter Thiel is the co-founder of PayPal. I think he was one of the first investors in Facebook. He
Mhm.
has investments in LinkedIn, SpaceX, so definitely a tech genius. So he really talks about how to break through the noise and the competition that exists within the tech industry, and how to build in your branding in the very first phase of your tech development as well, and how to really cut through the competition and focusing on your niche, and then once you've conquered that vertical, then moving into adjacent markets from there. So I would
That
say those are my top three right now.
Those are three great recommendations, and I'll definitely put them on show notes. And I think the first one I haven't read, and I like the Peter Thiel's book is definitely a good one. It reminds me a little bit of category design, which I think I mentioned it to you in the past, but Christopher Lochhead with Play Bigger, one of the co-authors of it, and as well as Niche Down, very much talks about that kind of. You don't have to necessarily create a category; you can just shape it to make a different impact and to come out ahead of the market because you're reshaping it. So I had a guest on recently, and we talked about that through kind of Tesla, right? They didn't create the category of the electric car, sorry, but they reshaped it, right? So that the people that want a high performance, electric powered vehicle or can purchase something like a Tesla. So awesome! I'm glad that you're bringing up those books. Definitely would add value to the folks that get to listen to this podcast, and I'll share it on the notes. Um, what I also like to do is sort of like this quick fire, just rapid fire, questions for you. Not a hot seat, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you what came first, the chicken or the egg, and we could debate that. But tell me, how many hours of sleep do you get?
Cool. So I'm in Pakistan. My company, DigitalHire, is in Washington, D.C. So I do work through the night, but I think it's such a small price to pay for the things that I want in life. But, I still get to sleep 6 to 7 hours a day.
Oh, that's good.
I can make it through the day with 3 to 4 hours, but, I know I'm more productive if I sleep more. And especially with, remote working these days, I don't really there's no commuting, there's no getting up to get dressed and things like that. So I do get 6 hours, in the regular.
Good. So 6 to 7 hours. That's great. So right now, what tool or tools are you using that are helping you become more productive or help you with your collaboration with your team?
That's so funny because I was just debating about this with somebody I met on LinkedIn just a couple of days ago. And we were just going back and forth about, our apps really making us productive or taking us away from them. So his whole stance was that, people tend to stay busy just to be busy. But for me personally, I know my working style, I'm very visual. So I need to see a list in front of me, not necessarily to keep me motivated, but to keep momentum. So the one that I like the most is Todoist. It's a very simple, it's a free app. It's a to-do list app that you can collaborate with your team on. And because of the new iOS update that just came, they already have a widget, which I think is so cool. So I don't even need to go into the app. I can just see my lists, on my phone screen. So
Oh,
I would
wow.
say that.
Very cool. That's one that I'll put. I hadn't heard of that, but everyone talks about, either headspace because they want to relax for a good hour, meditate, or have their team meditate and just have some mental health sort of moment. And or the Asanas of the world for collaboration, where you see the flying, what is it, a flying unicorn? They always have, like, when you're, yeah,
I have that one, but Calm and like Headspace are the two big ones that I've
yeah.
used too.
Yeah, Asana has this flying unicorn every time you finish like a to-do list or some kind of a project. But anyhow, so that's a good one. I'll definitely put it in the show notes. What are you backcasting or future casting with the state of the industry and how digital hire might be an impact?
Absolutely. So I'm a very goal-oriented person. I have lots of big goals for the future, but the biggest one is to get to $1 million in revenue in the next 4 months. And in the future, honestly, I see digital hire and services like this becoming the norm of the recruiting industry. Video bios are already a thing on YouTube, right? A lot of people put up their resumes in forms of video. So all we're trying to do is give everyone a platform to do that internally. So I really think that that's where the industry is headed, just because, if we look back at the recruiting and the job market, so much hasn't changed in decades, right? But now that there a lot of the things we talked about, personal branding, company culture, a lot of that is going to become more and more relevant as we move ahead. And especially as business owners, when we think about the longevity of the business, when we look towards the next 2 to 5 to 10 years, these are some of the factors that we really have to think about if we're trying to attract the right people and, more importantly, retain the right talent within the company.
Then how can people get a hold of you, Karishma? Co-founder and president of DigitalHire. It's been a great honor to have you here chatting with us at 12:30 or 1:00 a.m. Pakistan time, here at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Smart Chickens podcast. But how can people find you and connect with you, Karishma?
Absolutely. So I'll give you my email address. I'm super approachable. That's something I wasn't good at, approaching other people before I did sales, but approach. I'm very approachable. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do have a link on my LinkedIn profile. You can book whatever time works for you. If it is related to recruiting or not, I love a good cup of coffee and a good conversation over a cup of coffee. So I'm happy to do that over Zoom or any virtual medium. So.
Excellent. And I'll put that on the show notes. I'll definitely put your LinkedIn, your website, and other ways for them to contact you personally and the organization at DigitalHire. So thank you so much again. It was a pleasure, Karishma. All the best with Q4 and end of the year. And I'm excited to be able to, to see your journey in the next couple of months and see where it's taking you to get to that 1 million in revenue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Gianni. This is such a fun conversation. And, I look forward to talking to you soon.